We're almost done as far as the post functionality is concerned. We have the ability to create and edit posts. Now all we really need to do is display a list of posts right here where we say that we should be doing that. And we also need to provide the ability to delete an individual post. So let's first of all focus on our list of posts. Now remember that this is the administrative portion of our CMS. So we need to display our posts as efficiently as possible. And in my mind, that would be a table where each row is an individual record in the database. All we really need to show is the title, I guess the slug, no, not really the slug, the title, the date created, and whether or not it has been published. And if it has been published, the date as to when it was published. So we can make this a lot easier. Instead of doing all of this manually, we can use the web grid helper. So we can go ahead and create a variable called grid, and we want to new up the web grid constructor. Now we need to supply our data source, and we can do that using our repository. So we can use post repository, and we want to use that getAll method. Now we do need to decide how we want to display these posts. Do we want to do it in descending order according to the created date, or do we want to do it in ascending order? I think descending order would make more sense. So we should have some ability to tell the repository that we want all of the posts ordered by a certain column. So we could just simply add that as a parameter. In fact, we could have many optional parameters so that then we could specify like order by in this case, and we would want to order by date created and descending order. So we need to add this order by parameter to our getAll method in the repository. So let's go to our repository, let's find the getAll method, and let's add a string parameter called orderBy, and let's initialize it as null. Now I'm noticing that in the previous lesson we didn't use our underscore connection string variable here inside of the add and the edit method. So let's go ahead and make that quick little modification. We just want some uniformity here, because if we ever change the value of this variable and for some reason the add and edit methods don't work, then that could cause a problem. So by fixing that, everything should be fine. Okay, so we have our getAll method now with an orderBy parameter, and let's check to see if any value was supplied to orderBy. So if not string is null or empty, and we will pass orderBy. If it's not, then we want to append the orderBy clause. So we will simply say SQL plus equals, let's concatenate a space, and then we will concatenate the value of orderBy. And that should be sufficient in our case. So we can go back to our post.cshtml. We are now retrieving all of the posts, ordering them by date created, descending, and we are passing that as the data source to our web grid. And once you have a grid, you want to get the HTML so that you can write that to the response. So we use the getHTML method, and then there are a lot of parameters that we can use to configure the HTML output. We can modify the style, the CSS classes, and all of that stuff. But for right now, let's just modify the columns, because as it is, it's going to display every single column that is returned from our repository. So we can go ahead and run this so that you can see what this looks like. We're going to see all of our posts, which I think we have 3. And no, we're not. We're going to get an exception. So let's see. Incorrect syntax near the keyword DSC. Well, that's rather interesting. Let's look at the SQL statement. And we have select all from posts. We don't have the actual order by clause. That would be an issue. So let's add that. And we will do order by and then the order by clause. That was a very silly mistake. So let's run this again, and we get no errors except for this 403 forbidden, which is normal. And then we want to go to admin and then post. Then we should see a table that has the ID, the title, the content, date created, date published, so on and so forth. So I guess we should show the author ID, but eventually we will want to show the actual author name. But of course, we don't have the users yet, so we will just stick with author ID. And yeah, we could make the argument for displaying the slug, but let's not do that. So we only want to display the title, the content, the date created, whether or not it has been published. If it has been published, we will display the date and then the author ID. So let's go back and let's modify our web grid output for only those columns. So the first is the title column. So we have to use this columns parameter, and this is a little verbose for my liking, but it still is nice to use. So we're going to use grid.columns, and let's make our first column the administrative column, the column that's going to have the edit and the delete options. So we'll add a column by calling grid.column. And this column isn't going to have a header. It's simply going to have the edit and delete links inside of the cell. So we use the format parameter, and then we use razor syntax to output an A element. And the path is going to be ~admin/post. This is for editing, so we will specify edit. And then we also need the slug. So we will use item.slug. And then the text for this link will be edit. And you know what? We can't really put two links here because we will have a syntax error. But, we could just create another column, one for editing and one for deleting. And that will be fine. So we will change this second link to go to admin post delete, and then the slug, and then the text for this link will be delete. So we have our administrative columns. Now we need the columns for the actual data for an individual post. So the first thing we want is the title. So we will add another column by calling grid.column, and we want the title. Now we could specify some other things here like the actual text that's used for the header, but title is going to be sufficient. So we can go on to the next one, which will be the date created. So once again, call grid.column, and we want the date created, but we don't really want that as our header. We want date space created. So let's do header and then date space created. Then we want whether or not the post has been published. So once again, grid.column to create the column. Let's call this published. And you know what? Instead of just displaying yes or no and then having another column for the date that it was published, let's just consolidate those. And if it's published, we will display the date. Otherwise, we won't display anything at all. So we will use the format parameter. And let's use razor to output a span element where we will display the date based upon whether or not it actually has been published. So if item.datePublished, and this is a nullable date time value, so if published has value, then we want to display that value. So we will do item.datePublished. Otherwise, it will be an empty string. And then our closing span, and that should be fine. We need a closing parentheses there. So next we need the author ID. So grid.column, and we will do the same thing that we did for date created. We will specify author ID, but for the header, let's just say author. And that'll be good. So let's save this. Let me format this with Control KD. Let's see what Visual Studio does. That didn't do anything good at all. So let's just go ahead and run it. And hopefully we should see a table that just has the columns that we want. And we don't. We get an exception. So system date time does not contain a definition for has value. Okay, that's interesting. I thought that it would be a nullable date time because in the database, it is a nullable field. Let's just make sure that that is the case. So let's fire up Management Studio. We want to connect to our database engine. And then we want to go to our post table to look at the schema. So we will click on the plus sign. We want columns. And right here we have ID, title, content, date published can be null. So that's interesting. For date published, we are getting an actual date time value, not a nullable date time. Okay, so let's just output the date published value and let's see what we get. So let's not use a span element then. Let's just do what we did for the date created column, where we specify date published, and then the header will be published. All right, so let's go and continue. This is going to cause our application to crash because we didn't complete that whole thing. And looky there, that's interesting. I learned something new. Okay, so now we have our edit and delete links. We have the title, the date created, published, and author. So if we click on the edit, that should take us to our edit form, and it does. And that is a beautiful thing. Now, of course, we don't have the code for deleting, so we will need to add that, but that will be easy enough to do. Now, we're not quite done with this web grid, because as it is right now, it's just going to display everything. We really want something that's going to be paginated, because as we get more and more posts, we definitely want to have pages so that we can see just a few posts at a time. So that option is set through the web grid constructor. So let's specify our source using the named source parameter. Then let's use canPage, which is a Boolean value. We want that set to true. Although looking at IntelliSense, that is already initialized as true, as is the rows per page is set to 10. So we can keep those values if we want to, but I don't really want to do that, at least for the rows per page. So let's set rows per page to something a bit bigger, like 25 or 30. Let's do 30. That's a good, nice round number. So whenever we have more than 30 posts, then our web grid is going to be paginated. So the bare bones of our list is done. Just like with our form, we need to give some attention to the markup and all of that stuff, but we will eventually do that. Right now, I'm just concerned with the functionality. So let's go to our post handler, and we want to add the code for deleting a post. So here where we are checking for the mode, we have edit and new. Let's also check for delete. So else if mode is equal to delete, then we want to delete the post. So we will call a method called delete post, and we can pass in the slug because that is what we are going to have from our request data. So let's add that method. We have create post, then edit post. Let's just copy all of this code for the edit post. We're not going to need everything, but it will give us a start. And let's change it to delete post. We have only one parameter, which is the slug, so string slug. And inside of this method, we could retrieve the existing post just to make sure that it did exist. And if it did, then we could go ahead and delete it, or we could just attempt to delete it. The latter is much more simple, so let's just do that. Now, of course, we don't have a delete method on our post repository, but that's okay. We can add that here in a few minutes. So we want our post repository, and let's just call the method delete, or rather let's do remove. That's what you typically find with a repository, or at least with the repositories that I create. And then we want to pass in the slug. And then that will remove that given blog post. So let's go to our post repository, and after the edit method, let's copy that and paste it. Let's rename it to remove, and we also want to get rid of all of the parameters except the slug. So everything else can just go away. We want to create our database connection, but we want to use a delete SQL statement. So delete from posts where slug equals to our parameter of @0, and then we will call the execute method passing in the SQL statement and then the slug value. And so with that done, let's run our application, and we will need to go to admin/post, but then we will click on the delete link for the second post and we go to our form. That is not what we wanted. We wanted to delete the post. But you know what? that was a mistake on my part because this is a GET request. It's making a GET request to admin/post, which is going to be handled by our post.cshtml file. It's not ever going to get to our post handler. So this is where we need some JavaScript, or one of the solutions would be to use JavaScript so that we can simply make an AJAX request to the handler, specifying the mode as delete and then providing the slug, so that the handler could then do its job. So now let's stop running our application, and it's been long overdue. We need to add the layout page for our administration section. So for the admin folder, right-click, click on Add, and let's say if we have an item here for a layout page, we don't. So let's add a new item. Let's do a search for layout page. And we do, but we want the C# version. So let's just call this _admin layout, and we will add that. And inside of post.cshtml, we will set layout equal to ~admin/_admin layout.cshtml. And inside of our layout page, we need a reference to jQuery or whatever JavaScript libraries that we want to use. First of all, let's just make sure that this works. And let's run the application. Let's go to admin/post, and let's view the source. And we have our HTML boilerplate, and then the table and everything else. Now, we do have something new here, and it is because we have, first of all, a layout page, but also because I had installed an extension to Visual Studio Express, and it's new to Visual Studio Express. It used to be only for paid-for versions of Visual Studio, but the add-on is called Web Essentials, and this is something that you definitely want to install. It is completely free. And all you have to do is go to Tools and then Extensions and Updates. And for online, you will want to do a search for Web Essentials. And for some reason, this is taking a while to retrieve, but it will show up there and you want to install it because it has a lot of goodies. One of those goodies is something called browser link, or at least browser link is automatically enabled, but this little bar gives you a lot of really cool things. And I don't really want to sidetrack here, but this is just too cool to pass up. So let's organize our screen here. I'm going to put Internet Explorer on the left and Visual Studio on the right. I'm also going to fire up Chrome because this is going to be really cool. So I'm going to go to the same URL in Chrome. And inside of Visual Studio, you see this little, what looks like a refresh button. And you can see that there's a tooltip. It says browser link to browsers connected, Internet Explorer, and Chrome. And it tells you what URLs that they are connected to. So let me change this. Let's add a div element, and this is some text. Now, I would normally have to go to Internet Explorer and then to Chrome and refresh both of those browsers to see this change. I don't have to do that with Browser Link. I can just click on this refresh button, and it's going to refresh all of the browsers that are connected through Browser Link. And you can see that Internet Explorer updated to this is some text, and we see the same thing in Chrome as well. So that in and of itself is really cool, but watch this. Let's click on Design here, and I'm going to move my mouse over different elements within the document. And you can see that Visual Studio kind of looks like it's freaking out, but this is actually selecting the individual pieces of information that we could use or modify. So if I go to this div element that contains the text, this is some text, I can click on this. Now, I'm going to start typing inside of Chrome, but look at what happens in Visual Studio. This has been replaced. You can see that Visual Studio is updating with whatever I type inside of Chrome. This works in Firefox, Opera, all of that stuff. So this is completely cross-browser, and it's just awesome. So with this change, notice that Internet Explorer is still showing the old version, so we just have to refresh again, and then Internet Explorer updates as well. That's called Browser Link, and it is relatively new to Visual Studio, and it is completely new to Visual Studio Express, or at least this functionality with this Web Essentials bar down here. Okay, so let's maximize everything, and we need to add a script reference to our layout page. So let's stop running our application, and we have this scripts folder, and we have jQuery, we have jQuery UI, validate, knockout, modernizer, and a whole bunch of other things. Now you can see that there are some drop downs here as well. This is also the Web Essentials extension at play, because we have jQuery, which is the complete source version of that. We also have the min version, but in order to save space in the tree, it's all collapsed under jQuery-1.10.2.js. So here we see the minimized version. Then we also see the IntelliSense, and I'm not exactly sure. I guess it just provides IntelliSense for the jQuery library. So we want to add a reference to the minimized version. So let's just drag this onto our layout page, and that will automatically insert a script element for that file. So now all of our admin pages will have a reference to jQuery. Let's go back to our post.cshtml. And you know what? In order to save time for this particular lesson, because this has gone on for quite a few minutes, let's skip the Ajax portion. We'll come back and add that in. But for now, we can make this work by making a simple modification to our post. At least I think we can. For the mode, let's see, not mode, for the slug, this is where it is. We are checking to see if mode is equal to edit, and then we are getting the slug that way. We can modify this so that it is going to check to see if it is not new. If it is, then we will retrieve the slug, otherwise it will be empty. This way we can use the form for deleting the post. So if we run this again, we can go to admin and post, and then we can click on the second post delete. Now earlier we got a blank form, but now we should get the information of that post. We do. So whenever we click on submit, that should go to the handler and it should delete that post. So let's click on submit, and that post was deleted. So later on, whenever we start to massage, we're going to have to do more than that, the HTML and the CSS and all of that stuff, we will also add in some usability features. Like, for example, I would like to be able to just click on the delete button and get a confirm box that says, are you sure you want to delete? If you click yes, then it sends an AJAX request to our HTTP handler to delete it. Otherwise, nothing happens. So there will come a lesson when we start to make all of the HTML and the usability better. But as I said earlier, I want to focus on the functionality first. So we are essentially done with the posts. Now we need to turn our attention to managing the tags that we would assign to a particular post. And we will start that in the next lesson.